Obviously, very recently, it was the big anniversary of Brexit Day, the anniversary of the referendum, the idea when we finally, apparently, unleashed our chains and we were able to finally run free and we regained our sovereignty and all this other nonsense that the Brexiteers have cried about for years, not realizing, well, what the reality they were going to get themselves into. And we have seen, certainly over the past couple of days, of course, all the big players releasing their big thing. You've had Farage come out and say, well, actually, Brexit isn't going that well. We have to ask, really, what was it all for? You had Boris Johnson. He hasn't written anything yet, which quite surprises me. But given the fact that already, apparently, there are people in the Daily Mail that are already supremely annoyed at the level of quality that Boris Johnson is putting out, they're not that happy. But he puts out a tweet that is like, oh, happy, referendum day, anyone. What all these years since the things we've had all these quote victories, and they're not victories, but of course, obviously trying to spread the new sort of message, hopefully, to the Brexiteers to try and get those people who have been, as we've seen, disillusioned back on board the Brexit train. Well, he goes, oh, you need to ignore all the doomsters, all these like that. Brexit Britain is gonna go great. Well, here's the thing: all these people were promising that from day one, Brexit would be amazing, that it would be the best thing since sliced bread, and during obviously the period up until we left, up until January of 2021, there were really not that too many signs about which way Brexit would go. There were a couple of warning signs, of course, with businesses and etc. But now we've done it. Now we've had 3 years of Brexit. We can now actually start charting the disaster that is Brexit. Now, a lot of the Brexiteers will say, oh, no, that's not Brexit, that's COVID, or that's the war in Ukraine. But here's the thing: we're 3 years on now since COVID. You can't continue to blame COVID forever. The war in Ukraine will not last forever. And you can't keep on ignoring the very, very obvious warning signs that when you look at inflation, our inflation is far worse than any other European country. You look at trade, the loss of that. That has been because, again, we have left the European Union. None of these other new trade agreements you're signing with countries halfway around the world are going to really improve upon that. So they are desperate to really try and reinforce the notion that, oh, actually, Brexit is a massive success. Don't worry, the best is yet to come. And the thing is, you can only say this message so often. And to be honest, very often it is the last port of call before people start to jump off. And we've already been seeing people jumping off already in the polls. But when you're at that stage already saying, oh, don't worry, the best is yet to come, you can't really keep on saying that when that's not the reality of it. But today we're going to go over and cover Kate Hoey's piece that she wrote in the Express, because Kate Hoey, obviously one of the three big individuals that were wheeled out by the Leave campaign, along with Daniel Hannan, Patrick Minford, and Kate Hoey. And why Kate Hoey was brought out? Well, she was brought out because she was a Labour MP who supported Brexit. So you can see, oh look, we're all different sides of the so-called coalition. Obviously, very, very much pro-unionist as well. And of course, she infamously said that, don't worry about Northern Ireland, it's not going to be a problem. What has been Brexit's biggest problem? Well, it's been Northern Ireland. And if you saw one of the interviewers, one of the people on Question Time, he was like, well, you know what? If we can get proper Brexit, you know what? Ireland can just have Northern Ireland back. To which there was a very interesting reaction from the audience. But I think that would have terrified, I think, a lot of unionists, probably certainly someone like Kate Hoey. But we'll see what happens. But this is her piece. And of course, she's going back to blame the civil servants, because apparently when we were in the EU, the civil servants didn't have the job to do, which is completely false. If you ever know anyone that works in the civil service, even from the Brexit time when we're in the dreaded EU times, no, they had a job to do. They did it. This is once again, they're looking for new scapegoats. This is why Brexit didn't fail. It's because of the blob. The civil servants are to blame. As I said before, you should not be politicizing the civil service, but this is what the direction, at least these Brexiteers seem to want to go in. They can't blame the EU anymore, so well, we might as well blame someone else. And well, looks like they've chosen to try and blame the civil servants for all their own projects' failings. So let's go over what Kate Hoey has had to say about this. But before we do that, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can buy me a coffee. And of course, there's the YouTube thank you button. And of course, there is the Pony Club down below as well. So let's crack on into this then. So this was from the Express with the title of "The EU was a comfort blanket for civil servants, a reason not to do their job." Again, the idea that this was just a comfort blanket, well, you have to prove that they weren't the ones doing their job. Can Kate Hoey actually prove civil servants weren't doing their job? No, she can't. She's never worked in the civil service. She doesn't know the first thing what she's talking about civil servants. But anyway, we'll crack on into it. So most people will remember where they were the day the result of the 2016 referendum was declared. I certainly do. A couple of hours after sleep, I'd been packed up to drive into the BBC studios in Elstree to appear on David Dimbleby's all-night broadcast. The speculation was over, and I knew the result. In the car, I listened to many shocked voices being interviewed on different radio stations. Elstree was buzzing with an atmosphere which I can only describe as feverish. I could not stop smiling at everyone, and then I saw the glum face of Anna Sudbury, sitting on a chair in the corridor. After all the exertion of the campaigning and the exhaustion of last 24 hours, it hit me. Against all odds, the might of the establishment, again, when we say establishment, bear in mind, some of the biggest establishment figures were campaigning for Brexit, not against it, but there you go. Most of the media, and I want generally saw as BBC bias in favour of Remain. Oh my God. Again, that is ridiculous. The idea that the BBC had a bias in favor of Remain. No, Jesus Christ. If we've said this before, if you looked at Question Time, even leading up to the referendum, you would think that Nigel Farage was like the one-man UKIP party. He was on Question Time all the time. He used to get asked all the time, and we've seen the figures, and it has been reported continuously that Leave got far more, favorable airings than the Remain campaign did. Or to keep BBC balance, well, here's someone from the Remain campaign, and then here's someone from the Leave campaign who could just go off and spout whatever they want, and they would never get any pushback from the presenter. So, yeah, there was no bias in favor of Remain. So it was coupled with the opposition to Leave of all the political party leaders in the Commons. The people had spoken. They had listened to the speeches at our countrywide rallies and acted on what we said. This time, their vote really did count. Many living in the Labour areas had come out and voted for the first time ever, and they'd sent a very loud message to all my Labour colleagues who had told them that if they vote Leave, that they were bigots and racists, and they refused to be intimidated and voted Leave. Here's the thing, that wasn't the message what people were ultimately saying. What we were saying really was, at the time, look, there's a lot of people using the whole immigration argument that Leave were making and hiding behind that to make say some very racist things. And I will say this now. I have a friend who voted Leave. He says that he always feels very uncomfortable by the way he voted because he felt that he had made an alliance with people who were bigots and racists. Because it is true that not all people who voted Leave were racists, but unfortunately, there were a lot of people who were racist who voted Leave. You cannot deny that. But back to it. And again, still not getting to the civil servants at the moment, but here you go. In the studio, David Dimbleby was polite but clearly shocked. As I sat beside him, the door on number 10 opened and out came the Prime Minister to make a shock resignation speech. It wasn't just the Remain campaign had lost, it was also David Cameron. Yeah, because that's what the official Leave campaign became. It was Boris Johnson and Michael Gove having a go and constantly airing their dirty laundry at David Cameron. And a lot of people also voted Leave because they didn't really care about the question they were being asked. They saw it as a reason to give David Cameron a good kicking. And that is also a lot of what other people voted during the Leave campaign. They didn't care about the question that was really being asked. Some people generally voted to leave because they wanted to give David Cameron a good kicking. They didn't really care that they were being asked to leave the EU or not. So I look back on the 7 years that have passed since that historic vote and proud of what we achieved, but sad to say that we could have achieved so much more out of our country. Of course, here comes the argument. Oh, you don't understand. We could have achieved so much more. Kate, Brexiteers were in charge. The idea that Brexiteers were not in charge is ridiculous. The people who are in charge were staunch Brexiteers. The people who are in charge now are staunch Brexiteers. The man who got Brexit done and then made the most pro-Brexit cabinet, Boris Johnson, got your Brexit done. They were fully in charge. They have been in charge and at the levers of power since the referendum. The idea that they have not been in charge and not done everything has been because on them. No one else. Ooh, that's me. So, the first 3 years saw Parliament do everything it could to stop us leaving. That's not true. You could have had Brexit. You could have had Brexit if the Brexiteers had supported Theresa May's backstop, but they didn't. They refused to do so. And partly because, once again, as we are constantly seeing, yeah, you got Brexit, but then what was Brexit? This is why you've got such a fundamental breakdown in this once very staunch and powerful pro-Brexit bloc that used to exist. It's no longer there because none of them can actually decide now what Brexit means. What do they do now that they've got Brexit? And a lot of them are realizing actually it was a very bad idea. But there you go. So the procedural machinations by the ardent Europhiles had made the House of Commons at times look more like an American bar in old cowboy films. Here's the thing. That had happened because also your own Brexit party people use that to make a very clear message. And I want to remind you, when we had the series of indicative votes, that this hard Brexit that we've sort of ended up having, only about 62 MPs voted for that. Meanwhile, if only 3 more MPs had voted for Kenneth Clark, I can see his face now. I can't remember his name. It might be, yeah. But again, very old Tory grandee. I can see his face, but I can't remember getting his name now. But yeah, he put forward, look, let's stay in the customs union, and they only lost that by 3 votes. That was the closest any vote actually came to winning. Your version, your true Brexit, Parliament didn't win. But unfortunately, that's what you ended up pushing through because your diehard zealots took over and pushed for the hardest possible Brexit. And now it is creating its own problems which we always said would happen. And you can't seem to admit that those problems are being caused by your precious project. And because you can't admit that, you have to stop blaming other people. And this is what we have seen from these Brexiteers for the past 3 years. It's not Brexit. It must be X. It must be someone else. So on the Labour side, I was in a tiny minority. Graham Stringer, Kevin Hopkins, and Ronnie Campbell were solid from day one, joined by Frank Field and then later by Caroline Flint, John Mann, and 1 or 2 others. Each time we voted against the Labour whip, we took comfort in knowing we had Labour voters on our side. I don't think you do anymore, to be honest, but there you go. I constantly thought back to the many working class men and women who came up to me after the rally to thank me for being there. Thank goodness there's a Labour MP here, they said. And sometimes their emotional reaction would bring tears to my eyes. When Keir Starmer, as Labour's European ministers, changed the policy to demand a second referendum, I could no longer stay in the party. Well, here's the thing. Your entire campaign, your Leave movement, the unofficial one, both said at different times you can have a second referendum, that there should be a second referendum, a confirmatory second referendum. That never happened. We never got okay, this is actually Brexit. This is what people wanted. No one got to vote on Boris Johnson's Brexit deal. That was not put to the people. Hey, this is the Brexit you're going to get. Are you really sure you want this? Even Nigel Farage has said that if Boris's deal was put forward to the people, it would lose, that Remain would win. So you wonder why they are desperate not to have another vote like this. So, sitting now, as I do in the House of Lords, as a non-aligned member, the opposition to us leaving the EU is even stronger. This time it comes from numerous ex-EU commissioners, diplomats, and former civil servants, plus the many learned judges, lawyers, and academics and bishops. So she's blaming the House of Lords there. And good, because to be honest, the House of Lords has been the only place where proper adult conversations have been able to take place. Now, I do not like the House of Lords. I think it still very much needs to be reformed. But to be honest, in those couple of Brexit periods, those big Brexit questions, I'm glad the House of Lords existed because they actually had the proper conversations that did not happen in Westminster. Then we have the large contingent of Liberal Democrats. Most of the Labour peers, with notable exceptions such as Lord Golcott and the Conservative Party, that in theory welcomes the opportunities Leave gave us, but in practice does very little to carry them through. Well, I'm sure you're probably mentioning sort of Kimmy Badenoch when she was in front of that commission very recently, saying, look, I'm not going to be an arsonist and burn through all these Brexiteer rules and regulations that you want throwing out. Because if we do that, that creates even more problems of trade with the EU. And we're already having significant problems of trade with the EU. Do you want to make them even worse? So, once again, Brexiteers don't even really understand what they are actually doing. So, anytime Claire Fox or myself made a supportive Brexit remark, there is a colleague, there is a collective sigh of discontent around the chamber. Yes, because they all know that you're pro-Brexit and they know that you're going to spout off something that is completely ludicrous and ridiculous. So the battle continues to get EU law off our statute book. Again, there will be consequences to that if we do that. Restore Northern Ireland's peace in the UK. Restore Northern Ireland's place in the UK. Again, there will be consequences if you do that. We've talked numerous times about that means upsetting the Good Friday Agreement. And we've always said, where do you put the border? If you're not going to be in the customs union and single market, where do you put the border? And there's only two places you can put it. You can either put it between the North and the Republic of Ireland, which again breaks the Good Friday Agreement. So you cannot do that. You explicitly cannot do that. Or you put it in the sea, which is what we've ended up having to do. And yet, take Hoey, the Northern Ireland won't be a problem. So back to it. So give real support to the fishing industry. Well, Ken, no one's really going to be interested in sacrificing the entire UK economy for an industry that is worth as much economically the same as about Harrods, which is about less than 0.01%. No one was going to go to the wall. No prime minister in their right mind would ever go to the wall for the fishing industry. Boris Johnson even recognized that fact himself. Even Nigel Farage, where is he? He's meant to be the big pro fishing industry guy, but where has he been? He hasn't been close to any coastal towns. He hasn't been to see any fishermen because they know who's to blame for their current predicament. It's Nigel Farage. And of course, start behaving as an independent country should by controlling our borders. Well, we always controlled our borders. This idea that there was just completely unchecked immigration always was false. We always controlled our borders. But of course, it's the great lie that they spoke of. Oh, you don't understand. It's all this unchecked movement, etc., etc. And of course, they took big advantage of the 2015 migrant crisis that was going on at the time, very, very much so to help fuel the 2016 Brexit referendum. Hence, why we always say there was a lot of racism involved in the Leave campaign. But during the long years of EU membership, our civil servants lost confidence in making decisions in the interest of the UK. Do you have any guidance to that? Do you have any evidence to support that, Kate? Don't think you do. You have absolutely no evidence to back up that claim. You're just blindly blaming them. They relied on the EU guidance. Well, yes, because if they had to enforce a law or anything like that, they would need that EU guidance to make sure that they weren't, breaking EU laws. And even now, if they're going to create a law that might, interfere with the, Brexit trade and withdrawal agreement or the trade and cooperation agreement or even the Windsor agreement, now then they need to refer to that. Because this is what you wanted. Or at least part of you wanted. Like I say, Kate Hoey, I'm sure will say this isn't Brexit. This is just Beano. This is Brexit in name only. Sadly, we left there is the very little tendency in Whitehall for the inertia and for wishful thinking about the past. Again, you've got nothing to actually back up your claim about this. You're just saying it because it's a convenient new thing to blame. Kate Hoey used to blame the EU. Like I say, it was the whole cottage industry that the Eurosceptics used to have. Oh, let's blame the EU for all our problems. Once we leave the EU, it'll be plain sailing. Well, we're out of the EU now, and we have a lot of problems. All of them very, very much exasperated by Brexit, which we always said we would. Like I say, this was one of the key arguments. They've said, look, we know the UK is not in a very good place right now, but if you do Brexit, it will make a lot of these situations that we are facing in the UK a lot worse. And then that got called Project Fear by people like you, Kate. And look where we are now. So we need a government to show real leadership and proclaim why the future can be so much better with our new freedom. So much has been squandered in the last 7 years, but I don't regret my vote. I just want it honorably honored. I just want it honored fully. Again, there are no new freedoms really to take advantage of. This whole idea that we had sovereignty, that we were going into the world. Well, the thing is, what Brexiteers always forgot was that other countries had their sovereignty as well. And that they're not just going to let the UK do whatever it wants. And of course, what Kate Hoey would like, of course, I think would be a complete Singapore on the Thames, a complete rip up of all these EU laws and regulations, regardless of what they are, to put back a hard border between the Northern Republic of Ireland, which would lead to a lot of trouble. A lot of trouble. We've said that. How then would you deal with that, Kate? They are still complete lunatics, and Kate Hoey is still, I think, the worst of them still to this day. I made a video, it must have been last year. I said, Kate Hoey, she's the worst Brexiteer. I still maintain that to this day. Say what you want about Nigel Farage, Boris Johnson, and Daniel Hannan, but the worst of them is always and always will be Kate Hoey, because she's a complete ideologue. She's a complete nutcase when it comes to this. She doesn't even know the first thing what she's talking about. She's got nothing to back up her claim that it's the civil servants at fault here, that they're just wistfully longing for the past. Okay, where's your claim about that? Where's your evidence to back that up? Oh, see, Brexit's not working. Civil servants. And that's her claim. But she's got nothing to actually back that up. What really is going on here is what we've always said. It's Brexit. Brexit is at fault. And here's the thing. In the next parliament, you're going to get someone like David Lammy, who's probably going to be the business and trade minister. And he has already said unrepentantly, we are going to have to do deals with the EU to alleviate these problems in and around trade. Now, of course, doesn't go as far as many people who want to rejoin the EU, like me, would like. But I've said before, that's a good step in the right direction. Because eventually, as we always said, you'll get to a position where you'll go, this is Brexit. This is as best as it is ever going to be. Meanwhile, that's what we used to have. This is what we got now. Everything that they promised to you has become complete trash. It was never going to be fulfilled. People are already seeing that and regretting their decisions the way that they voted. So eventually, as I said, we'll probably end up back in the single market customs union. I think that should sort of be our first real pot of call to aim for. I can't really see the EU membership denying that, sort of us becoming very much like Norway, being in that regard. And like I said, Nigel Farage once said, what's wrong with being like Norway? But no, that is the first sort of goal. And it would be a lot easier than people think, because you can just do an EU alignment bill, as we did before. You just say, look, here's the EU laws and regulations. Here's one bill. We're going to align to all of that. Businesses have a year to do so, to align to that. And then, of course, eventually, the eventual enter into that would be so. And like I say, no one will be denying that. No one is saying that we can't do that. Like I said, even the EU, when we're in the process of leaving, said, well, do you want to remain in the single market customs union? And all the EU responses was, yes, if you want to do that, you can do. That was the offer that was made. Because, like I say, the EU were just confused as anyone else. They were like, okay, you've done Brexit, but what is it you actually want from it? And again, that was on the Brexiteers, that they never had a plan. They didn't really have an idea of what they wanted to do. They just wanted to get, as far as they're concerned in their ideology, as far away as possible. And it was based on this libertarian ideology that if you get rid of all these regulations, we can lower our tariffs to zero, and somehow it will be magic, rainbows, sunshines, and unicorns all the way. Of course, that has not happened. And I do believe that is where we'll end up. And I think we'll end up probably back in there probably a lot sooner than at least people think. Because like I say, where we are now, we're here a lot sooner than, again, a lot of people thought. So, and I think in the next parliament especially, a lot of the Brexiteers are going to lose their seats in parliament. So they're not going to be as influential, especially with the massive conservative wipeout that you look at all the polls that are predicting. A lot of them are going to lose their seats. You're going to bring in a lot of pro-EU Liberal Democrats. There's a lot of pro-EU Labour people coming in. Even with sort of current Labour stance of, oh, well, we're not going to rejoin the single market yet. But eventually, I think we will, because you cannot ignore the economic damage it has done. And if you are going to be a responsible government, you're going to have to solve that. So how do you solve that? Well, you do alignment deals to begin with, and then you go back to the people and you go, look, this is Brexit. This is as best as it is ever going to be. Are you really sure you still want this? And then you ask, well, we want back in the single market customs union. Do you want this, or do you want back in the, into that? And then eventually after that, you go, well, now we want to be full EU members, because now we want a say in what goes on. And again, that is entirely possible. There's a lot of people out there who I know in the comments say, "Oh, no, that's just fancy." No, that is entirely possible. It is not. It is entirely possible. It is doable. There is no one in the EU, especially sort of key decision makers, saying that the UK can never rejoin. There is no one saying that. So, as always, thank you very much for watching, and of course, we'll see you all next time.